So good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome back to the last day. And usually the last day is either a kind of an act of freeing ourselves from all tensions and everything that has happened in the days before, or the tensions are elevated to a new level. So let's see what happens. But this is going to be an important day, as starting from this morning session and going into the last session in the afternoon, we want to sum up a bit. We want to raise a few new questions if there are any, and then we want to have a common discussion on the way forward, on the DL18 platform, on how to shape the products and how to prepare the next steps. And I have a feeling that there are few paths that are already done and made, but there are still like open questions, and there are probably a lot of open questions that we need to discuss then in the afternoon. So the idea for today is to have this first morning session, and it says keynote, but this is not going to be any kind of classical keynote like the Peter did, the one on Sunday. It is more going to be a kind of a reflection on certain issues that were raised during the process. I was not here for the first 3 days, but then for the first 2 days, but then I got some kind of briefing, and I was listening yesterday, and I was in the DL18 from the very beginning on taking part in some activist forums, so I will just reflect and pose some questions and issues. Aleksandar is going to take it a step further and respond, and then we will have a discussion. The second step in the afternoon, after the coffee break, will be the panel debate. So there is no swimming today, unfortunately. This is bad. Bad, very bad. There will be if we speed up and finish a bit earlier, then there will be still at least some small swimming after 5 p.m. Huh? We can speed up the swimming or speed up the talking? Talking in order to swim. I thought swimming in order to have more time for talking. No, it's fine. Very fast. So then we will have this second panel debate entitled From Activism and Ideas to Political Action, Translating Leftist Visions into Political Platforms. So then this will be a kind of a debate. We have Max from Friedrich Ebert Stiftung in Croatia. We have Michelle from Germany, Aleksandar, and Elena is going to join us on the panel, simply to discuss this very fundamental question, as whatever we think and do in thinking, the question is how to translate it into political action, and what are the pitfalls and possible traps on that way. And then finally, there will be this last final discussion on the way forward for DL18, and then it will tell you everything that you ever wanted to know. Huh? Okay. So, but I thought for the first part, and this is really a kind of an attempt to sum up a bit and to pose a few questions. I thought that to make few points organized by 3 sections. I want to say something in the first part about the context, which is the part that I entitled contextualization. Then I want to raise few questions and dilemmas that we face, and this is entitled contestation, as what are the contested issues. And then in the last part I want to say a few words about possible solutions and emotions attached to the possible solutions. So the first point, the contextualization, to start with something obvious and to focus a little bit on the region. We just yesterday got the news that there is a new prime minister in Serbia, a female LGBT former. Was she activist also? No. No, I just from civil society. So which is a huge difference. We had the events in Macedonia. And there was a huge debate yesterday, Philip, as I understood you debated for 2 hours, basically, the consequences. And I'm just betting who is going to write the first op-ed. Would it be Iskra or Philip? or Igor Štiks, so who knows. And there were the events in Macedonia and elections in Kosovo and the permanent crisis in Bosnia, etc., etc. So when we just look at the obvious, the situation in the region is simply alarming. There is no democracy, or if we take it like formalistically or institutionally, there is a decline of democracy. There are consequent efforts of the authorities to diminish and to reduce the public spaces and to destroy the public, any kind of open public at all. There is much more of control and soft repression that is applied in different sectors, be it through the institutions, through destroying basically the very meaning of the parliaments, like it is done in the Serbian case, or through rule by law, where the judiciary is simply instrumentalized and controlled in order to put forward to promote certain interests. Then there is obviously within the society a sense that the solidarity has gone, an overarching solidarity, and this is pretty much connected to this kind of attitude of pragmatism and certain kind of neoliberal reasoning that we have in the region. So this is the alarming situation, and the numbers. I just picked a few numbers. There was recently this research of the Pew Institute in the U.S. on democracy and the social situation in the region, and the figures for Serbia, for example, were quite interesting. The people were asked whether democracy is the best possible form of government. And then 23 or 24 or something said yes, more than 30 said no. It's basically, or was it even 40% said no, or there are alternatives, and then more than 40% said it doesn't matter at all. It doesn't matter at all. So which is once again telling us something. Then when we look at the opinion surveys, opinion polls, asking the questions, who is the role model basically in the society, and when we ask the people in the Republika Srpska, or partly also in Serbia, and we see then the Putin is like the strong man that the people like the most, and the European Union is simply losing its stance at all. In Bosnia is similar. Then Erdogan, if you would ask the Bosniaks, Erdogan will be like the role model, the obvious role model, and the EU as the previous role model has decreased in its attractivity basically. And then you have this like very, very sober figures about the number of people that want to leave the region. Then you have like the recent opinion polls from Kosovo, where Kosovars were the most optimistic people in the 2000s, and nowadays like 60 or 65 or 70% of the youngsters in Kosovo want to leave or would like to leave if they would have the chance. Bosnia the same. Croatia is losing the population. So what we have is a alarming situation, and then the question that we ask ourselves is basically what is the left able to provide as answers, and if we would just go a step further, we could basically argue that the situation of the left is alarming as the overall situation in the region is. So there are basically not really there is not an obvious political space and place left for the left on the political arena. And it is pretty much obvious, we will discuss it in the second panel, that in the region the social democrats, or the idea of the social democratic kind of making politics, has partly destroyed the notion of both of social democracy and damaged the notion of the left. And this is a process basically that is ongoing. So the second point in this contextualization is something that Aleksandar mentioned yesterday. This is this issue of peripheral position of the region. So we still have this kind of relationship of core and periphery, and we haven't yet on the left or generally in the society discussed the consequences of even deepening peripheral position and situation in Eastern and Southeastern Europe. When we enter the debate about multi-speed Europe, which is basically even, I mean, Merkel took it a bit from the forefront, but in a sense there is still this kind of a factually there is a multi-speed Europe debate, and there is basically no answer for the Western Balkans, for Southeastern Europe whatsoever. So the enlargement policy is a dead man walking, nothing is happening. The role model of the European in the periphery is losing its attraction, and then the question is, what is the future of this relationship between the core and the periphery? What is going to be the future of this relationship in Southeastern Europe? So this is something that we have to take into account, and when we speak of and think about DL18 and about this kind of transnational form of Europeanness and togetherness on the on the left side that we want to create with the DL18 platform, then we have to take this kind of core periphery situation into account. Then the third point in this contextualization is obviously this kind of new form of governmentality, alluding to Foucault, new kind of governing, new logic of governing, basically, that is spreading across the region. And I mean, just yesterday, as I was listening, many of you in the papers on democracy were referring to it, and this is the threefold kind of new governmentality, which is authoritarian in politics, which is capitalist and neoliberal in economy, and which is a nationalist in ideology. This debate about new authoritarianism, we can pick it up in the afternoon, is something, and the colleague from Macedonia yesterday was referring to the question of new authoritarianism, how to address it. But what is striking in this kind of new governmentality in the region is this permanent adjustability of this kind of governmentality to any kind of discourse from outside. So there is an adjustment to democracy notion, there's an adjustment to Europe, there's a mimicry around Europe and democracy. There is this kind of pragmatism that Vučić probably is the best possible example of it. And this kind of adjustment, and then the decision to take Anna as a prime minister is just another level of this kind of adjustment, and we know how this is going to be instrumentalized on a European level, or when he meets Merkel for the next time. This kind of adjustment and mimicry in terms of democracy and Europe that are constantly undermined in practice, in political practice, is one piece of the cake, and the second piece of the cake is basically this adjustment to the global capitalist agenda, and like the whole region is probably encompassed by that one, and this is basically this story that we hear in the press conferences of Vučić. There are no alternatives. There are no alternatives. This is it. We just need to cut down. We just need to optimize, privatize, open up, take the investment wherever they come, and this is basically a common issue that we have in all those types of governmentality. We have it in Hungary, which is in economic terms. For example, last year Hungary had an economic growth of 2-point-something%. So basically, whatever he is doing in terms of ideology, and whatever Orban is doing in terms of authoritarian way of running the country, he is sticking to the neoliberal and capitalist pragmatist agenda, as the guys in the region are doing quite similarly. And this is where I want to just to raise the question that Petar Bojanić raised in his keynote on the first day, and then the left is left to be concerned and to be engaged in destroying the picture of this new governmentality, in destroying hypocrisy, in loathing of masks, of falsity, manipulation, bluff, and the question is how to do it in a situation where this kind of governmentality is simply spreading, and you have a huge proportion of the population, and I'm just once again alluding at these Pew Research results, where the huge part of the population is simply not interested whatsoever in the question how the country is governed. And my last point in this contextualization is this issue of fascism and the similarities of the situation nowadays with some other historical points in the 20th century. And there's this wonderful, I just read again the Umberto Eco's piece from 1995 on Urfascism. And when you take Umberto Eco's points and just listening them, cult of tradition, traditionalism, fear of difference, appeal, identity appeal to the former middle classes, life as a permanent warfare, elitist, selective populism, machismo, they speak, the news speak, Orwell. Then you have many of pieces that are alluding at this kind of Urfascism that we have in the region, pretty much connected to this kind of governmentality that I just described. So this is when we spoke yesterday, someone raised the question about the enemy, about the new enemy. This is, from my point of view, the first step just to embrace the context and to define the new enemy as good as we can. So, second bunch of questions are the open questions and dilemma that we have to work on. At the beginning, I just want to read once again the Michael Waltz's, what Petar quoted at the beginning in his keynote speech. The Michael Waltz's take on the historical task of the left, and just when we read it again, and I will just read it like the few sentences by Michael Walzer. This is something that should remind us about the questions that we have to ask when we act on the left side and when we think left. So I'm just quoting, and then I will just comment briefly. So the historical task of the left, Michael Walzer. I have friends who are ready to put their bodies between the police and the first immigrant they try to arrest. All of us are planning to register as Muslims if there ever is a Muslim registry. One city after another is declaring itself a safe haven for the undocumented. Some liberals and leftists are wearing safety pins, and others are calling this much too small a gesture. But right now, all this is gestural. It is important to imagine ways to resist the far-right momentum of a Trump government, but nothing that I have read about resistance points to a serious political strategy. Some good and not so good tactical suggestions have appeared online, but they don't answer the historical task question. So this first quotation is basically telling us a lot. First of all, this gestural politics, and then secondly, the fact that the right wing ideology is taking over in so many contexts in Europe and in the region, and then what is basically the resistance, how to form resistance against it. So these are the questions that we have to take up and pick up for the DL18. Then the second part of Michael Walzer's comment, theory is hard, but the practical political work of the next few years is all too obvious. It is the defensive version of standard left activism. We have to defend what's left of the gains of post-Second World War social democracy. The right-wing attack is extraordinarily ambitious against immigrants, unions, public schools, healthcare, welfare generally, and the still inadequate constraints on environmental damage. In resisting these attacks, we obviously need to join any coalition that offers some chance of success. So this will probably bring us in the discussion to Corbyn and to Macron and to move us to the center and let us talk about Sanders and social democracy in the center nowadays. But this is really a kind of a very relevant and question. The extreme right is extraordinarily ambitious. They are taking over all aspects of society. The whole one? Theory is hard, but the practical political work of the next few years is all too obvious. It is the defensive version of standard left activism. We have to defend what's left of the gains of post-Second World War social democracy. The right-wing attack is extraordinarily ambitious against immigrants, unions, public schools, healthcare, welfare generally, and the still inadequate constraints on environmental damage. In resisting these attacks, we obviously need to join any coalition that offers some chance of success. And this last sentence is basically crucial, something that I want to pick up in the debate and that we have to answer in the DL18 platform. How to join any kind of coalition that promises a chance of success, but at the same time remain ideologically, keep the integrity that you basically need in order to be authentic, if you wish so. And then the last quote, last part of the quote. Some of our comrades won't find this congenial work. I have friends who had to hold their noses to vote for Hillary Clinton, and a few who couldn't stand the stink and refused to vote for her. But I also have a wiser friend who explained why he found the vote easy. Don't think, he said, of your own scruples. Think of the welfare of the most vulnerable people in the country, and then vote gladly for the candidate who minimizes their vulnerability. That maxim should guide our politics today. But the most vulnerable people need right now is the protection afforded by a strong constitutionalism, the defense of civil liberties and civil rights in the name of the Constitution. This is a centrist politics. So whatever else we do, we have to work with other Americans to rebuild what Arthur Schlesinger years ago called the vital center. In fact, of course, the survival of a vital center is also the precondition of an active left. So once again, the question of the center, the decision for whom to vote, and then finally what Michael Wouters formulates, what is really like striking and provoking. The survival of a center is the precondition of an active left. So that would mean that Macron is a precondition for a new left policy in France. I don't know. So these are the questions that Michael Wouters is posing, and these are, I believe, few of the open questions and dilemmas that we have to work on in the DL18 platform that we have to discuss and to pick up. Then other questions that popped up, at least yesterday and in some of the activist fora before, one of them was basically the issue of agency. When we assume that the bondage and the link between the left and the deprived and the workers is not the natural one anymore, and that it is changing, and that the left is basically losing the agency and losing the agents, then the question is how to create a new agency on the leftist side. And Philip yesterday just said this sentence that provoked the reaction by Tina, speaking about Ne davimo Beograd. You said, we are here, I mean, you quoted one of the activists, we are here for those who cannot come. This is precisely the issue of agency. How to address those that cannot come because of simply living conditions and the circumstances that they have to live in, the new precariat, and whether this kind of creating agency, but that step is not, as Tina criticized it yesterday, is not something too prepotent in a way, and then destroying the agency whatsoever. So this is one of the questions. And that was one of the questions also in prison when we discussed the question of the left with guys from Vedran. And there was what was the name of the Gorani, who was very explicit about this one. So we want to claim the agency, and we want to do it also by appealing on certain nationalist feelings and identity issues that the people have. And this is basically what Albin Kurti is basically promoting, and when he is testing the ideas of Great Albania, etc., but at the same time trying to get the deprived to vote for Vetevendosje. Then the next question, and we discussed it yesterday in the panel on democracy, is basically the question on social movements and their potential for mobilization, but not only for mobilization, but also for creating a new leftist thinking in the region. And then basically related to it, the fundamental question, what strategy to take, what way to take, whether to join political or create new political coalitions that want to enter the formal politics, or to stay outside and to create some new kind of thinking outside of it. And then finally, one of the open dilemmas is the one which Tina addressed yesterday. She told us at the beginning, when she was reacting to the papers on democracy, that democracy papers, and I'm quoting her, were not inspiring any kind of utopic thinking, contrary to the papers on economy, in the cluster of economy, that were able to, at least from Ivan's position, that were able to inspire some kind of utopia. So if we go back to the context, and we have this kind of new governmentality that is destroying the notion of democracy, of any kind of democracy whatsoever, and at the same time we have democracy, we have papers and we have thinking of democracy that is not able to inspire any utopia, then we have probably a dilemma, we have a problem, we have a challenge that we need to address, and then to ask basically what is the utopian horizon for the left. So these are like few questions, and then just to move briefly to the third part, to possible solutions and to the question how to move from thinking on the left side and thinking the left to political action, and then back again to thinking. Last week I was in Belgrade. There was a conference by European Civic Forum, and Claudio Crashun, one of the guys that published one of the papers for DL18, was on the panel and was basically, and he was protesting for years on the streets of Bucharest, and he was mobilizing and running around, and then they decided to form this new political party, Demos, and to join to basically, they are right now in the phase of preparing first for the European elections for the European Parliament, and then to enter the political scene in parliamentary elections. So, and he was quite harshly attacked from, there were a few activists that basically said, so this is the wrong way, then you have to adjust to the circumstances, you accept the rule of the game, and basically what is going to be the effect? You will just disappear. And but he said, this is quite interesting and probably paradigmatic. He said this basic dilemma, entering politics or remaining outside, has to be, at least from his point of view, has to be resolved by putting or sticking to two basic principles. He said whenever in the political arena he and his comrades and guys surrounding him enter any kind of ideological fallacy where you have to compromise your basic ideas and your ideology, your leftist ideology, activist ideology, then they will decide to opt out and to go the way back to activism. And the second one, he said, there is basically not this kind of gap between activism and the political acting, as even being part of the parliamentary group doesn't exclude an attempt to mobilize population over certain issues that are important for them. So, and he mentioned then housing, electricity, and the question of debt, the question of justice, etc., etc. So he said we go into the political arena, but we at the same time remain or want to keep this potential of mobilizing and going back to the activism, which was then rejected by the activists, etc., etc. But this is just one of the dilemmas that we have, and one of the issues that we have to discuss. Then the second one, and we discussed it yesterday with Nedavimo Beograd. The question is what kind of mobilization is needed, which has the potential to reach out to certain critical mass, to achieve a critical mass of people. And that just something similar, but I mean, that has similarities to Nedavimo Beograd, was this Spain municipalization movement that was pretty active in 2014, 2015, that led to partly to Podemos and to some other political initiatives on a local level, municipal level. And I just once again looked into the manifesto of the municipalization movement. There was this huge gathering in Malaga in 2015 with like 300 activists from Europe. And what they said is something similar what we can find partly in Nedavimo Beograd. The first major point in their programmatic approaches to politics is that they want to claim their autonomy vis-a-vis any kind of centralized instance. So we stay on a municipal level, whatever happens on the centralized level, we want to claim our autonomy because we are grounded in local circumstances. Then the second one, they have embraced the method of democratic construction in cities and localities, based on the ability to forge the politics of diverse alliances around certain local issues and struggles. Struggles is one of the crucial issues. And then they had the struggle of around housing, around municipal debt, about common services such as water, etc., etc. And this kind of forging alliances around fundamental struggles on a local level, at the same time keeping the position, the autonomy towards a centralized instance, was in the Spanish case at least able to create a kind of a strong political movement. And when you just, in terms of multitude, put all the municipalities together and see how they then approached and addressed the crucial points and problems of the politics in Spain, we could argue that to a certain extent they were successful. So, translated into the regional context, and speaking, for example, about Macedonia or about Belgrade or Serbia, then the question is what we have in Nedavimo Beograd, and which is a local initiative, and what we had in the Call for Revolution, which was a centralized kind of a story on a state level. We probably haven't had enough of this entrenchment in local struggles. And the question would be how to create a multitude, both in Serbia or in Bosnia or in etc., around the region, multitudes of autonomous movements that have independence or autonomy towards the centralized instances, and that are able to forge alliances focused on local issues, and there are so many local issues. So this is then one of the questions that we probably have to address in the DL18, because the DL18 approach was basically the same. So we go to smaller communities, we go to not to the capital cities, and we look for local struggles, and we then try to take these local struggles and thinking and activism around local struggles and try then to formulate them on a meta level. And then finally, as one part of the solution, and looking again back towards the far right, the question that then enters the debate is the question of emotions. And as just recently, I mean, ongoing, for example, in Austria, where I live in a moment, there are new elections coming in September, and the Social Democrats just yesterday decided to be open for a possible coalition with the Strache Party, with the Freedoms Party, the one where the Hofer was running for the presidency against Van der Bellen. And what we have seen in Austria recently, and what we have even in the on a regional scale, we have the question that the far right and partly social democrats and conservative parties of the center that are moving, or at least taking some part of the discourse of the far right when it comes to migration, when it comes to the other, when it comes to security, when it comes to the vision of national economies, etc., etc. That basically the far right is much better in catching the emotions, and they were doing better since 2015 in the so-called refugee crisis, and all these emotions of fear from the other, fear of someone who is going to take away a piece of the cake that we have to defend, the fear that the immigrants are going to take to flood the labor market and reduce the possibilities for true Austrians or true Hungarians, etc., etc. This is something where the far right was pretty much recently able to dominate the discourse, and even to put the Social Democrats and some centrist party into the situation where they have to adjust to this one. And on the other hand side, we had Corbyn and Sanders, Corbyn recently and Sanders prior to that, who, I mean, someone yesterday said old white male, yes, but they were able to a certain degree to capture the emotions with very clear positions from the leftist side. So the dilemma that we have is basically how to capture the emotions again, and how to bring this kind of joy and enthusiasm that I saw first time I joined few guys for the call for revolution in Macedonia on the streets, at least for a few hours. This kind of joy, I mean, there was anger, obviously. There was some kind of fear, how the regime is going to react, but there was some intrinsic joy and enthusiasm. At least I felt it, and probably in Belgrade, I know in Nedavim or Belgrade, there is certain kind of joy. And then the question is basically how to translate this, or take this positive emotion of joy, enthusiasm, and to translate it into kind of political action that can be or could be as powerful as the rightist politics of fear nowadays in Europe is. And I believe that this is something that has to keep us on the left side busy, and that has to be a part of the DL18 in a certain way. How to create, even if we speak about DL18 as a process, how to create enthusiasm and joy, and to transform it into some kind of political action. When we speak about emotions and about joy, then we have basically, and this is where I want to conclude. This is where we have to speak also about engagement, what Peter did in his speech on Sunday, obviously, where he said that engagement is synonymous with the left, and that engagement on the leftist side, and I would add based on joy and emotions, can have no end in a way. But the crucial issue when we think about engagement and we think about capturing emotions is basically how to create power out of the engagement, political power, and how to create a kind of a togetherness under certain circumstances that can be politically powerful. And then there is a wonderful quote from someone from Germany. I don't know, the book was not translated into our languages. Caroline Emke, she's a thinker, philosopher, activist. She received there is this Peace Prize of in Germany, the big Peace Prize that is awarded once a year to people that have promoted democracy and open societies. He got it last year for the book called Against the Hate, so addressing once again the politics of fear. And then she, and I'm just going to quote her. She basically created some kind of rather diffuse but still interesting recipe of how to capture emotions and how to transform them into power. And then she starts by quoting Hannah Arendt. In German, I don't have, I just try to translate it by myself. In German it goes, who understands German, Macht ist immer ein Machtpotenzial. Es entsteht zwischen Menschen, wenn sie zusammen handeln, und sie verschwindet, wenn sie sich zerstreuen. Also this is a quote from Hannah Arendt. Power is always a power potential. It emerges between people when they act together, and it disappears when they leave each other in a way. So basically, this is this action of acting together and not acting together. And then she goes on to discuss the we, the togetherness in a society. And then she says, dieses Wir ist immer ein Potenzial und nicht etwas Unveränderliches, Messbares, Verlässliches. That means the we is always a potential and nothing that cannot be changed, nothing that cannot be shaped, nothing that cannot be reformed or reshaped into something that can be powerful. And then she says, das Wir definiert niemand allein. Es entsteht, wenn Menschen zusammen handeln, und es verschwindet, wenn sie sich aufspalten. The we is never defined alone or by a single person. It emerges when, again, Hannah Arendt, when people act together, and it disappears when they start to disengage. And then the last part of the quote, gegen den Hass aufzubegehren, sich in einem Wir zusammenzufinden, um miteinander zu sprechen und zu handeln, das ist eine mutige, konstruktive und zarte Form der Macht. To fight the hate, politics of fear, if we wish so, to come together in this we, in this togetherness, to talk to each other and to act together. This is the most courageous, constructive, and tender form of power. And these three terms, courageous, constructive, and tender, might be a possible program for the left to a certain degree. I mean, courageous, obviously, constructive. So what does it mean? What does it mean, constructive? To adjust to certain circumstances in situations, or to compromise principles, or not? And then tender is just once again referring to this joy and positive kind of emotion, something tender, not aggressive. And this is, as Caroline Emke puts it, relying on Hannah Arendt, this is something that might be a possible path to think about the new leftist activism and the new leftist policies and politics nowadays. And someone, it was you probably from Macedonia, you told if we don't work together, we are going to die together. Which is once again referring to Hannah Arendt. If we don't act together, if we disappear or disengage, then there will be no activism, and then this kind of governmentality that I described at the beginning will prevail. So these are like just few questions, not systematic, and just a kind of an attempt to discuss few issues and to pose few questions. And Aleksandar is now going to take few points and to add few additional ones. And then let us have a debate and prepare us for the panel debate. Yep. So Aleksandar.
Thanks, Vedran. Well, I will try to take no more than 15 minutes for this. Basically, I want to discuss three issues which are related to what you were saying. One would be this, what you call the new way or mode of governance that we have around. Then I want to go a bit into the issue of the center, as you said, whether center is necessary for the left and how this relation goes on. And then I want to come back to just an observation on the history of social democracy and what it can teach us, and especially about this decentralization, municipalization, the we, and establishment of the we. First, like one thing that we also discussed at one point, some of us here, is do we, when we look at our context, at our region, are we really in a position, as it is usually thought, that we are behind history, behind the historical moment that we are now in, or like the world is in, or we are ahead of it? And that there is a certain reason to think that we are ahead at this point, that we are no longer kind of being always one step before everyone else, but that now we are in a kind of a forefront of this kind of tragic historical development. And when you say this new mode of governance that we have in the regional context, that unifies authoritarianism in politics, neoliberalism in economics, and nationalism in ideology. I mean, when you try to contextualize it with the whole debate on populism and the right that is so big in the world today, like, what would we say about these politicians that we have, for example, in Serbia or Croatia or in most of our countries? I mean, are they like typical populists? Are they the professional politicians that were, you know, that the populists react to it and come about by criticizing? Well, one could say neither, I mean, or both at the same time. Like when we think of Vučić, would we say that he's just a populist, which is not a kind of professionally neoliberal kind of politician? Well, no, he's at the same time also the neoliberal. So this combination of the authoritarianism and neoliberalism kind of like I would say is kind of like a new thing that might come about in the historical development in the West in the following years. That they are now more in the phase that we might have had like in the 90s or something like that, but that what can be a possible future, that they will come to this kind of Vučić type politicians that will kind of combine both and live off that. And well, I think that to think about this, we should be like historical about it and understand one thing, like what are the aspect, what on the one hand, like this very strong, very detached neoliberal economic policy and this kind of populist kind of building of false legitimacy, how do they combine? I would say they really come about from this historical process where social democracy basically resigned from its critical left position in the society, became this kind of like compromise oriented party that basically lost its kind of political identity. Then of the EU, like, because in general in the beginning of the 2000s, EU seemed to be this kind of bright future, this kind of place which will provide us with freedoms and with wealth, while this didn't turn out to be the case. And I would say that what is crucial here is to understand the role of the state. Because when we think about like what is and what has historically been the role of the state in the like post-World War capitalism, we can see that on the one hand, state should have provided like the economic concessions through the welfare programs to the majority, and on the other hand, should have provided also the benefit of political participation of the citizens. And both of these somehow seem to deteriorate at this point. Like, we neither have the one nor the other. And I would say precisely because of this, we get this tragic, catastrophic mixture of authoritarianism and neoliberalism. Because if you don't provide the material concessions, you provide a kind of like populist fiction. If you don't provide like a political participation, if you don't allow for the political participation to occur, then you basically step into the position of the neoliberal professional that decides on the questions without any kind of popular discussion. And I would say this is the one big thing that we should understand about how this mode of governance came about. Then now, as to the question whether center is necessary for the existence of the left. I mean, this I find a very difficult issue. And I would say, like, on the one hand, we have, as what Walzer says, this idea that if there is no center, then there is no left, in which, and one might say that this makes sense, especially in the sense that if basically this kind of populist right takes over, then it, and we have seen this so much to be true in our societies, it gets it holds the grip on society much stronger than the centrist party of the 2000s, let's say, in the sense that it really takes control over media, it takes control of the political process in the way that we can't say that the centrist parties of the 2000s did. And in this way makes it harder and more difficult for the left to come about or to develop politically. But on the other hand, we have the possible sectarian position, which would say, well, the opposite is true. I mean, the inexistence of the center and this economic and political deterioration that is going on can only help the left, in the sense that, you know, only when the things get really dark and really desperate, then this kind of ideological fiction that is going on, that is making people participate in the kind of exploitative processes going on, they disappear, and the people can see truly society, capitalist society, for what it really is, and go on to change it. I would say that, I mean, I wouldn't say that any of this is really true, and I wouldn't agree with what Walzer says. And to understand why, I want to just make a short point on like the history of social democracy, because I really think this is crucial for us, and we are not looking enough in that direction. So on the one hand, when we think about like social democracy and what's the identity of social democracy, and I think this is very relevant for the identity of the new left. Also, we have like one dominant strand of interpretation that says, well, what was social democracy? It was the political organization that was born out of the worker struggles in the end of the 19th century, that after the war, because of political pressure and the ideological climate, went on to construct the welfare state. And its purpose was to construct the welfare state, and the welfare state is this, as we say, civilizational achievement, historical achievement that the left has had, in the sense of having universal education, universal pension, low or inexistent unemployment, and so on, and social security programs. And this, as much as nowadays, when all of these programs are deteriorating and this situation is getting more and more difficult, we should praise and we should remember these social institutions and try to defend them also. At the same time, I think this idea of what social democracy is and this interpretation of its history is kind of has a lack that we have to be aware of, because when we look at the workers' movement and this whole historical progress, we see that that the welfare state was really a compromise, was a political compromise within the political climate in which we had the revolution in the East, which went in the direction that it went, and then we had a kind of reluctance in the West to go in the same direction because of all the problems that it brought about. And also because of the kind of pro-capitalist tendency that was ready to compromise but was very aggressive if one was trying to get more than that compromise. And when we look at the history before making of the compromise, we can see that social democracy was not only a party fighting for certain type of state or within parliament, but was a social organization. And I think this is the crucial thing that we miss nowadays. It is the idea that social democracy is not only a political organization, and today by political organization we mean very explicitly a parliamentary organization that strives towards reforming the state or hegemonizing the state in a certain direction, but is a social organization, and by social we mean political but at the same time economic organization. And I think this is something that we miss very, very much. And this would mean that basically this organization as such, not only in its goal, but in its mode of organizing and means of going about in the society, was oriented toward provisioning, toward immediate provisioning for the people. So when we look at trade unions, for example, trade unions after the establishment of welfare state became this institution that defends the state provisioning and the defense of the labor and the majority. But trade unions in the previous historical conjuncture were themselves a social organization that tried to provide certain economic and social protection and benefit to its members. And I think this is what we lose. This is what we lost in the process. And this kind of split between politics and economics that we have today. And when we think of the identity of the left, the new left, we always think in political terms. We always think in terms, well, do we have to agree with what left was before? Do we agree with the revolution, or we agree with the more 68 kind of left with the identity issues and so on? I think all of this is very much only concerning the political side of the question of the left, while there is the economic side, and by economic, not the economic that comes about once we get into power or once social democracy establishes itself into power, but within the process. And I think this is what we lose. And finally, this, I would say, very much relates to this question of how would this decentralized kind of struggle of today, the social movements struggle that we have today, go on. And I think we are in this also very much trapped in this distinction between political and economic, and accepting that what we are doing and what the left is all about is the political side of things. When we think about this decentralization, we think about, in municipalities, we think about political control, but not about economic organization from below that might allow people to survive in the crisis situation that we live today. When we think about, and finally, when we think about the we, I would say that we also very much think in this kind of overt, or I wouldn't say overtly political, but solely political, or political in this new sense of the word that was that we were made to accept, while political should at the same time be economic. And if we think of the we, of the establishment of the we, in terms of political that is at the same time economic, we can see very clearly one thing. There is a we that is established. It is the we of the market. It is the we of us coordinating and interacting within the market through the price system. And then there is the question whether this we that is at the same time political, that is our identity, can also be an economic network, and way of economically connecting with each other, of making it possible for us to provide for ourselves on the local decentralized level, and to connect these municipalities in a way that would allow us to prosper or to build a different political alternative for today. Okay, that's it.